guys, welcome back. And today I'm going to be talking about the worst exotics in Destiny 2 and what I would do, or some kind of ideas to Bungie to make them better or kind of change to actually make them somewhat viable. I'm going to be starting off with Titan, and then I'm going to be talking about Hunter exotics, and then I'm going to be talking about Warlock exotics. The first one I'm going to be talking about is Mask of the Quiet One. Right now, it just states that it grants ability energy when you're damaged, and when critically wounded, regain maximum health on kills. In my opinion, this is just kind of a bad exotic because it wants you to get damaged. And on top of that, if you want the healing aspect of it, Precious Scars just does what it does, except better right now. So what I would do, honestly, is kind of give it a redesign and make it a Void exotic, and make it so that whenever you run a Void super and you have a Void weapon, multiple kills with Void weapons give you a Void overshield. And if you have a Void overshield, getting multiple Void weapon kills refresh your Void overshield and give you some ability energy. This way, it isn't a copy of Precious Scars, and you can also use it on Void with Offensive Bulwark, and not be forced to either run something like Bastion or Unbreakable for the overshield. The next exotic I'm going to be talking about for Titan is going to be Crest of Apalupi. Right now it just states that it generates an additional orb of power from supers and a healing pulse when a barricade is active. What I would do, and this is kind of controversial, but hear me out, is I would make it so that activating your barricade instead of healing you just gives you Devour. Especially with Devour being nerfed unless you're on Warlock running the one Void aspect, getting half your health back on a Devour kill isn't really that overpowered in PvP, and it actually makes it so that it has some use in PvE. Optionally, if you wanted to, and make it so that you can only run this with Void, you could do that as well, or make it so that you can only run it with a Void super, that way you can run it with Prismatic. And then on top of that, I would just give it Intrinsic Reaper. Reaper states that after activating your class ability, your next weapon Final Blow creates an Orb of Power. That way, you have the healing and you are getting more Orbs of Power, but at the same time, it's also not overpowered in PvP, but it's also not insanely broken in PvE. It just kind of has like a niche use. That way you can get some healing on Titan rather than be forced to only get healing when you're running restoration stuff on Solar. The next exotic is going to be Cuirass of the Falling Star, and I would just kind of give it the Pyrogale treatment, to where right now what Pyrogale does is it makes Burning Maul just one big cyclone and takes all your super energy, but it also makes Consecration create flaming cyclones as well. So I would kind of do the same thing, to where just like it increases Thunder Crash damage, just keep that, but make it so that when you're running Ballistic Slam, it either gives you increased damage on that, or you can actually make it so that whenever you hit enemies with it, it either gives you Ballistic Slam melee energy back, or it gives you an overshield. That way it's not just a swap exotic, because I think personally swap exotics are really boring, and I think Bungie is also trying to get rid of that with a lot of the changes they've been making, especially to like Eternal Warrior and some other swap exotics. The last Titan exotic I'm going to be talking about really is Mark 44 Stand-Asides. It states that whenever you're running a shoulder strike, whenever you're sprinting at full health, you gain an overshield. And then whenever you hit something with these melee abilities, it gives you a portion of your melee energy back. The problem with it right now is that it just gets wildly outshined by Paragon Greaves. So what I would do is I would make it so that if you have like half that overshield up, you either fully get your melee energy back whenever you hit something, or you deal a lot more damage. That way it somewhat is a contender with Paragon Greaves, and I'd make the increased damage less than Paragon Greaves, but that way it's kind of like a safer Paragon, and you also get some melee energy back, and it's not really a one-to-one fight with Paragon for which one is better. It's more of just a situational one, because I could see these with that change being better in GMs because they're safer, and Paragon Greaves being better in lower end content with it having no overshield, but it having just a lot more damage, and you also fully get your melee energy back now whenever you're damaging a mini boss, champion, or tormentors with Paragon. So right now, Mark 44 Sandsides just kind of sit as this weird kind of Curse of Osiris exotic that's never been changed. I hope they do something to it in the future, but as it stands right now, it's just kind of a pointless exotic to run. Moving on to Hunter exotics, the first one is going to be Blighted Ranger, or Blight Ranger. Moving on to Hunter exotics, the first one's going to be Blight Ranger. Attacks you redirect with your Arc Staff deal massively increased damage and generate orbs of power for you and your allies. Guarding with your Arc Staff does not consume extra super energy. What I would do is also add that you gain super energy back based on the amount of damage that you redirected, and then also optionally you can make it so that your Ascension or Tempest Strike abilities deal increased damage. The problem is that this might kind of contradict with the new Hunter exotic, Gifted Conviction, that improves those two, but it would make it so that this exotic kind of has, I guess, a bit more place in the meta, because right now there's not really a reason to have anything necessarily defensive outside of like Woven Mail or like Restoration and stuff, versus, and especially using an exotic for it isn't even worth it, especially when Ursa Furiosa exists if you do need something defensive for Titan. So right now I just don't see it being worth it unless they insanely increase the damage on it, or if there's just a really niche boss that you can reflect a lot of damage back at and deal good damage with. But as it stands right now, there's just no place for it, even in the one instance that it's very good in, the Grasp of Avarice first encounter. It still is just pointless when Celestial Nighthawk exists, and even when Raiden Flux exists, you just end up dealing more damage with that exotic over the amount of time it takes. The next exotic I'm going to be talking about, and it's actually a pretty good one, is Shinobu's Vow. All it does is that it improves skip grenades. You gain an additional skip grenade charge, and skip grenade damage returns energy when it damages an enemy. What I would do is just kind of give it the Lucky Raspberry treatment, to where collecting an Ionic Trace just gives you a bit more grenade energy. That way you can spam them a bit more, and you don't really feel like whenever you're out of skip grenades, you're just kind of wasting your time sitting around, unlike some other exotics might be. The next one up is Trident's Vice. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. It doesn't even matter because I know no one runs this in the first place. It increases glaive reload speed and melee damage when surrounded, and glaive melee final blows overflow around to the magazine, and glaive projectile final blows detonate in an explosion. So it essentially gives them some weird version of reconstruction and chain reaction, and then like also gives you syntheseps at the same time, but only for glaives, which isn't necessarily terrible if glaives weren't just the dumpster fire that they are right now. My opinion for now is make it so that whenever you're surrounded, it also buffs the projectile damage, because it doesn't buff the projectile damage at all. It just makes it so that whenever you get a final blow with the projectile, they detonate in an explosion, which is what chain reaction does, so it's kind of pointless on some glaives. But anyways, that exotic isn't really going to be good until glaives are at least somewhat in the meta and or somewhat just decent in general. Another thing that you could also do is make it so that the shield decreases less, or make it so that they can also make it so that there's an interesting interaction with the exotic Hunter Glaive, and make it so that the charge shot doesn't take your full block meter, make it so that it only takes half, so you could do 2 shots back to back. I think that would be kind of interesting, but for now it's not going to be good until glaives are good. The next one is going to be an exotic that actually used to be pretty good when it first released, but then it got nerfed and it never saw the light of day again, and even then it was only good in PvP. Gwisin Vest states that each Spectral Blades kill you get before going into stealth will restore more of your super energy, which on itself is pretty good, but with how bad Spectral Blades are and how badly this exotic got nerfed after, there's just no point in running it until Spectral Blades are buffed, which I kind of have an idea for and I'll state it in my next video. But for now, I would honestly just try to make it so that there's some interesting interactions with like Void Invis. One of my ideas was make it so that you get some type of suppressing rounds or weakened rounds after coming Invis, because you already have Gyrfalcons giving you volatile rounds after your Invis. Or if that's a bit too overpowered for PvP, just make it so you either get the suppressed or weakened rounds after using Vanishing Step on the aspect on Void Hunter. That way you can't like chain Invis back to back and still end up coming out and weakening or suppressing someone, because I think that could be pretty potent in PvP. The next exotic I'm going to be talking about is Orpheus Rigs. Right now they aren't even that bad, just the main problem is that they're just kind of power crept by the exotic class item, pretty much giving you the main part of this exotic, which is where it gives you ability energy for each target tethered by Deadfall. The thing with Shards of Galanor pretty much just does it the same. So in my opinion, what I would do to buff it is I would make it so that Mobius Quiver gives 2 extra shot, and Deadfall you get 2 shots as well. And for the people saying that this would be kind of broken in PvP, for super only exotic, I feel like this would be completely fine with, especially now that you can't exotic swap in PvP anymore. So I think this would be a pretty nice buff for it and actually make it maybe somewhat optional for certain builds. The next exotic what I'm going to be talking about is another pair of Hunter leggings, and that is Frosties. These used to actually be pretty good up until I believe they got nerfed, or I think they actually got changed the way that their ability energy increased happened. But anyways, the exotic perk states that you gain increased melee, grenade, and dodge regeneration while sprinting, and dodging increases your sprint speed. What I would do is make it so that you get the buff of the increased grenade, melee, and dodge regeneration when you have any elemental buff. That way you are able to have way more uptime. Bungie might have to change the numbers on the rapid cooldown increase, but I think this would actually make it a somewhat viable somewhat ability spammy Hunter exotic, without it just being this weird sprint to get your stuff back and then you have to go sprint some more. Because right now as it stands, it's just not that good, especially because the ability energy gains are not high at all. But that covers it for Hunter exotics. Now on to Warlock. First one is going to be Skull of Dire Arm Kara. This exotic used to actually be insane when it used to give you full Nova Bombs back, but now that it only gives half, it's not really that crazy. Right now, the exotic perk states that it provides additional damage resistance during Nova Bomb, and Nova Bomb kills grants super energy up to 50%. What I would do is just kind of give it the same treatment as Eternal Warrior, to where whenever you have a Void super equipped and you're using a Void weapon, multi-kills can get you surges, and then using your super gives you the maxed amount of surges, like you could say like 4. That way it makes for some interesting like damage cycle rotations with Edge Transit. But that's honestly all I think that you can do for that, unless you want to try to do something with your grenade or like melee and they want to change it that way. But I think that's just a fine buff in and of itself. The next one is going to be another helmet. It's going to be Eye of Another World. Right now it states that it highlights priority targets and improves the regen of speed of your melee, grenade, and rift abilities, and provides a small benefit to the AE of all weapons. What I would do honestly is make it so that the highlighted priority targets take either a bit extra damage, or make it so that you get kind of like a little chunk of your grenade, melee, and rift whenever you take out the highlighted priority targets, or do both things that I just mentioned. I think that would be kind of like a cool way, kind of like One-Eyed Mask, to where you want to hunt down this enemy and you get like an overshield for One-Eyed. This way, it's just, instead of an overshield, it's just a chunk of all your abilities, and I think that would be kind of a cool little change to see. The next thing is going to be Claws of Ahamkara. Right now, all it gives you is an additional melee charge and final melee powered melee final blows spawn an orb of power. Not terrible, but what I would try to do is give some type of grenade or melee recharge to it. You could do that by making it so that if you match your weapon to your melee type, you can, kind of like how Tessellation works with the grenade kills, with matching it with your grenade. You can have this, except all you have to do is, like, let's say I'm using a solar melee like the snap one. All I have to do is just get solar weapon kills, and I just get either a little bit of melee energy, or optionally you could have it to where it just increases the regeneration rate of your melee. It's also another idea. But besides that, I think it just needs a little bit of ways to get your melee charge back, because right now it's not really too insane from the looks of it, just getting an extra additional melee charge, especially when a lot of the Warlock melees either have a way for you to get an extra charge, or have a way to get them back extremely fast with either other exotics or even just Pugilist in and of itself. But onto the other gauntlet, which I don't think anyone runs in this game. It's Nothing Mantles. It's exotic perk Scatter Charge. You gain an additional Scatter Grenade charge and enables tracking for Scatter Grenade projectiles. Doesn't sound that bad on the surface until you realize that's all it does. And it's terrible because Scatter Grenades don't really have that big of an area of effect. Or like if you're gonna throw it into something, most of the time all the projectiles hit whatever you're throwing it at, so the tracking isn't really that good. And besides from that, you're just getting an extra Scatter Grenade. So not really much there. What I would do is either do one of three things, or do all three, or do even just two of them, which would be improve the damage on Scatter Grenade, which could be one of them. B, you could also make it so that your Scatter Grenades weaken, that way you don't have to run the one Void or Prismatic Fragment to have your Void Grenades weaken. And or you could give it the Shinobu's Vow treatment, to where whenever you damage someone with the tick of the Scatter Grenade, each tick gives you some melee energy back. I think that would actually make it so that these are worth running, and they actually might have somewhat of a place in the meta, even if, and that way you can maybe do like a charge grenade build with Scatter Grenades and kind of see how that goes. But until something like that happens, these things are just hot trash, and they always have been hot trash, so Bungie, please do something. Anyways, on to the next one, Storm Dancer's Brace. Each target you defeat with Storm Trance increases the damage you deal with it, and refunds super energy when Storm Trance ends, which is good. But once again, it's only a super exotic, which is just not really that good, and let alone it's just a super exotic that wants to get you a lot of damage with Storm Trance when you have Chaos Reach. So what I would do personally is just go down the Pyrogale thing again, to where I would make it so that your Lightning Surge kills either heal you, or what I would more lean towards doing is make it so that they give you melee energy back, either based on the amount of kills you get or based on the amount of enemies you hit. That way it's not just this swap exotic that's also just really bad as a swap exotic, and you could run it with Prismatic and still be able to run Storm Trance, because that's the only thing you can run on Arc. for Prismatic Warlock, and you also have some cool things with Lightning Surge. On to the next one, Prometheus Spur, and I don't know why they don't do this, and they keep on not. But anyways, its exotic trait, Embers of Light. Daybreak Final Blows create a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. When a solar super is equipped, solar weapon Final Blows grant rift energy. Standing in a rift increases this energy. And then the final part, which is the main part that kills it for me, is that Final Blows will, in a rift, consume your class ability energy to spawn a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. Honestly, gut the last part of this and just make it so that your rift spawns both rifts. I don't know why they don't do this. They just have not done it, and it doesn't make any sense, maybe from a PvP perspective. But even if so, just either reduce the amount of damage or reduce the amount of healing the rift gives you while running this exotic in PvP. And another one of my arguments is that Sanguine Alchemy gives you surge mods when you're standing in a rift, so you essentially have like a miniature version of what I'm talking about with Sanguine. But if you were to do the change, like I'm saying, to Prometheus Spur, it would be kind of cool because they would kind of be competing against each other, because Sanguine would be giving you a longer rift and a bunch of surges, versus Prometheus Spur, you're going to get a lot of rift energy, but you're just also using an empowering rift, which would be good in both, I would say, PvE and PvP, more leaning towards the side of PvE for this one. But as it stands right now, it's just a really wacky exotic to run, and playing catch up with your rifts aren't really fun, especially when it takes your rift energy. So something like that would need to be done, in my opinion, for it to be really worth running, because right now it just doesn't really feel consistent running, especially if you have full rift energy and you kill something far away, it's still going to take your rift energy if you're standing in a rift and spawn it there. So it's not even like you can use it in a lot of different locations depending on how your rift coming back kind of works, like depending on when you get it back and when you get a kill in it. But anyways, on to some of the honorable mentions. Chromatic Fire. I don't necessarily think that this is a bad exotic. I think it states that precision final blows from kinetic weapons create an elemental explosion based on your super. For Arc and Void, I think it's pretty good. Arc blinds and Void weakens. But for Solar, Strand, and Stasis, it's not really that good. Solar scorches, Stasis slows, and Strand severs. What I would do is I would make it so that for both Solar and Stasis, I would make it so that all you need is just like 2 kills to either ignite or freeze. Because if not, everything's just going to be dead around the person anyways, because it is an explosion on top of the effect that it's causing. And then for Strand, instead of Sever, in my opinion, what I would do is I would just have it Unravel. I think that would be pretty interesting to see a bunch of like unravels come out of the target as you make them explode and just kind of seek out other enemies, and then it kind of chains into itself in a way. And I think that would actually be somewhat interesting, especially on like a prismatic build where you're lacking a lot of darkness energy. Another one that's kind of getting an honorable mention is Helma-Saint 14. This was recently changed to get the Weapons of Light after Bubbles Overshield got changed in a way to where standing around the bubble gives you a gradual overshield, but by them doing that, they took away Weapons of Light and gave it to Helma-Saint 14. I think that you just need some type of secondary effect with this exotic, and I don't really know what to give it, especially with, like, I think it has some interaction with the glaive. It has some interaction with the glaive, if I'm correct, but glaives are just really bad once again. And then on top of that, it needs some type of secondary interaction, because Ward of Dawn isn't good, and the new Titan exotic, or the new Titan Super Twilight Arsenal just is better in and of itself, so there's not really a reason to ever run Ward of Dawn, let alone this exotic, especially when there's so many other better options out there now. The next one I want to be talking about is Hoarfrost Z. it states that it replaces your whenever you have a stasis super, your barricade becomes a wall of stasis crystals that slow nearby targets. And then standing behind this barricade grants you and your allies increased weapon reload speed, stability, and range. What I would do is give it some type of resist, or make it so that you get frost armor. I think that would be a pretty cool change. And then on top of that, if you want to go a little bit further, instead of having just the crystals fade out, what I would do is I would just have them explode at the end. That way, it's more stasis focused, and you could do some more like synergizing with it, rather than it just kind of being this weird like stasis pillar that you spawn. Because you can already spawn stasis crystals by using the melee. So unless you're going for like a ton of stasis crystals, and even then, it's why I feel like there's better options for it. Like you can run Heart of Inmost Light to try to get like a lot of your grenades that way. But that's one idea for it. And then same thing can kind of somewhat be said for Arbor's Warden. It's the Baronade one where using your class ability grants a barricade grenade. I know that it works with Dranger's Lash, and I know it works with Bastion, but there's like, it's only a barricade grenade, and it's pointless really in PvE. And in PvE, by the time I want to say you throw it down, your barricade is either already getting destroyed, or you're getting shot at while running to it, or a combination of both of them. What I would do is I would try to make it so that you have some type of like barricade regeneration when getting kills while standing behind a barricade, or something along the lines of that. But as it stands right now, this exotic is just really pointless, and it's just kind of like a fun little chuck exotic on. And even then, for what it's used for, it isn't even that good at doing. But anyways, guys, that's my kind of like ideas on the worst exotics in Destiny 2 and how to make them better. Bungie, feel free to use any of my ideas if you're actually watching this. And let me know what you guys think, if some of my ideas are like really overpowered, or if you guys have any ideas of your own, please tell me and leave them in the comments. I'm really curious to see what you guys think, and see what types of changes can come to these exotics to actually make them better and or more in line with other exotics in the game. But anyways, thank you all for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Peace.